Good morning. It's Pauline O'Brien here. Just wanted to have a chat about my service that I have recently started up this year to provide support to counselors and therapists, either in my practice or online via a virtual, secure online platform. So the reason why I decided that I wanted to also partake in supporting counselors is just because of my background and my own experience as a counselor. So when I first started out, I've been practicing now for over 15 years, but when I first got my master's, I had the very wonderful opportunity to move up to Northwest Territories. So me graduating, I got my master's in 2003 from the University of Ottawa. And I moved back to the Hamilton area shortly after school and then started looking for full-time work. So I was speaking to a recruiter in the government of Northwest Territories, and they gave me some information about applying to work. And so I started looking around and eventually was hired by a not-for-profit. It was Canadian Mental Health Association, and it was in Inuvik, Northwest Territories. So I was working as a crisis worker at the time, but it wasn't a permanent job, so I decided to take the risk. I packed my bags and I moved up there, and I worked there for almost 2 years. It was such a rewarding opportunity, but it was definitely a learning opportunity for me. So being quite new to the field, feeling, I had worked in crisis work and victim assistance and felt like I really knew, what I was doing clinically, but not quite understanding the context of where I was living. And so very quickly, I sought support through my colleagues and also through a social worker who I was fortunate enough to know from my master's. And so I started calling her. I think we were speaking bi-weekly or monthly just to sort of check in, just so that I had someone to talk to about my caseload and also process my own experience and my own reaction in working with the client population. So as you probably know and appreciate, working either in Northwest Territories or working in Nunavut, which I later did, you're working with a population of Aboriginal people, such a lovely culture, and I learned much about resilience and wellness from Indigenous persons that I worked with. But anyways, having been a non-Aboriginal person growing up in Southern Ontario and might not have been, given the information about historical trauma and about the trauma that First Nations and Inuit and Métis individuals endured throughout our history, I didn't quite appreciate the impact that the history has impacted these individuals. And so I heard a lot of stories that were very traumatic. I provided support and often felt way over my head in terms of, what solutions we could bring. And so I sought support, and I feel like that whole experience led me to other positions in my career. And so 15 years later, having really, lived and worked in cultures where I've been a non-dominant person in the culture, coming from a Eurocentric background and not quite appreciating what it's like to work in other cultures, I learned a lot. And I made a lot of mistakes. We had a lot of laughs, but I grew. And so what I feel like I want to do right now is to provide support, just to come full circle. And so that's why I've decided to open my practice also to providing clinical supervision and support. And so I have lived experience, I have work experience. I also have education and training. So after my experience in the Arctic, I moved back home. I was fortunate enough to work with Dr. Suzanne Stewart, who is an Aboriginal psychologist at University of Toronto. And I took courses at University of Toronto, and in 2016 graduated with a doctorate of counseling psychology with an emphasis on interprofessional collaborative mental health care. So my research was about how to communicate with other professionals when they need help. So, for example, how to talk to family doctors, how to talk to other clinicians, how to talk to family members in terms of providing a circle of support to the client, for the client and for their care. And so that's where I was at now. In 2017, last summer, I opened my own private practice and started doing counseling with community members here. I became, in the fall, I became a mental health service provider in Ontario for the non-insured health benefits in the Indian Residential School Resolution Support Program. So I'm a provider, so qualified individuals can come and see me with no upfront cost, and this is covered completely by Health Canada. And then I also work with women who have experienced historical trauma, who have experienced any sort of trauma, who have had prenatal or postpartum depression or mood or anxiety or adjustment issues and need support. And I'm also providing that support in terms of women's health. And I think that that's so important in supporting women and men, but also providing a safe space for people to work through their trauma story and to confront that and to elevate themselves to get to find hope and to feel better. So that's a little bit more about my practice. I wanted to point out that I'm providing counseling support, but also clinical supervision, and that I am a qualified supervisor in the Canadian Association, the Canadian Association for Addictions Counseling Federation, the CACCF, I think it's called. I'm a clinical supervisor with them. And I'm also a registered psychotherapist in the province of Ontario with experience providing supervision to social workers and therapists. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my Facebook page. It's Pauline O'Brien. On Instagram, it's Pauline O'Brien RP, as in registered psychotherapist. And I always through my website, www.paulineobrienrp.com.